Have you ever heard of a warrior with senses so heightened that he could detect enemy movements from miles away? A ghost in the forest who could smell fear and hear heartbeats through solid walls. What if I told you that during one of America's most brutal conflicts, there was an indigenous soldier whose supernatural abilities turned him into the most feared sniper in military history? Before we continue with this disturbing and little-known chapter of American military history, I need to ask, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below, and if you want to help us continue bringing these classified stories to light, please subscribe to our channel. We need your support to keep uncovering these hidden truths that the government doesn't want you to know. In the dense, misty forests of the Pacific Northwest, during the winter of 1944, a classified military program was initiated under the codename Operation Ghost Vision. As World War II raged across Europe and the Pacific, the United States military was desperately searching for unconventional advantages against their enemies. This search led them to the ancestral lands of the Yakama Nation, where rumors had persisted for generations about tribal members with extraordinary sensory abilities. Samuel II Rivers was born on the Yakama Reservation in Washington State in 1923. From an early age, his family and tribal elders noticed something different about the boy. While other children played, Samuel would often freeze, turning his head toward distant sounds no one else could hear. By the age of 10, he could identify approaching visitors to the reservation before they became visible, sometimes describing their emotional state with unnerving accuracy. The elders said I was born with the spirit of the eagle and the wolf together. Samuel later wrote in a letter discovered in 1976, "The eagle to see beyond the mountains, and the wolf to sense what hides in darkness. It wasn't something I asked for. Sometimes it felt more like a curse than a gift." Military records declassified in 2009 reveal that an anthropologist working for the War Department, Dr. Eleanor Whitman, had been tasked with identifying indigenous people with enhanced perceptual abilities for potential military applications. After interviewing dozens of tribal elders across the country, her research led her to the Yakama Nation and eventually to 21-year-old Samuel II Rivers. Initial testing at Fort Lewis was conducted under strict secrecy. The results were so extraordinary that they were immediately classified at the highest level. According to redacted documents, Samuel demonstrated the ability to detect movement through dense forest at distances exceeding 800 yards, identify the number of individuals in a hidden group with 97% accuracy, distinguish between American and foreign manufactured ammunition by smell alone, predict enemy patrol routes based on subtle environmental disturbances. Lieutenant Colonel James Hargrove, who oversaw the initial assessment, wrote in his classified report, "Subject II Rivers exhibits perceptual abilities that defy conventional explanation. While science cannot yet account for these capabilities, their tactical value cannot be overstated. I recommend immediate specialized training and deployment to the Pacific Theater, where jungle warfare conditions would maximize his effectiveness." Against the objections of several scientists who wanted to continue studying him in controlled settings, Samuel II Rivers was assigned to the recently formed 1st Special Service Force, a joint American-Canadian commando unit. After specialized sniper training, where he shattered every marksmanship record on the books, he was deployed to the Philippines in 1945. It was in the dense jungles of Luzon where the legend of the Phantom was born. Captain Richard Dawson, Samuel's commanding officer, maintained a personal journal that was only discovered after his death in 1988. His entries provide a rare glimpse into how Samuel's abilities manifested in combat situations. February 3rd, 1945. II Rivers did it again today. We were pinned down by what we thought was a single enemy sniper. II Rivers closed his eyes for nearly 5 minutes, completely still despite the gunfire around him. Then he simply said, "There are 7 of them, not 1. 3 on the ridge to the north, 2 in the banyan tree 300 yards east, and 2 more moving to flank us from the south." He described their weapons, their approximate ages, and even that one was nursing a leg wound. When we finally cleared the area, every detail was exactly as he had described. The men are calling him the Phantom now. Some are afraid of him. I'm beginning to understand why. What made Samuel's abilities particularly valuable wasn't just his heightened senses, but how he integrated them with traditional indigenous tracking knowledge passed down through generations. He could read the land in ways that formally trained military scouts could not comprehend. During a particularly crucial operation in March 1945, Samuel's unit was tasked with locating and eliminating a hidden Japanese command post that had been coordinating devastating counterattacks against American forces. Multiple reconnaissance missions had failed to pinpoint its location in the labyrinthine mountain jungle. Samuel spent 3 days alone in the wilderness, moving like a shadow through territory heavily patrolled by enemy forces. On the 4th day, he returned with not just the location of the command post, but detailed information about its defenses, personnel rotations, and even the daily routine of its commanding officer. The subsequent operation was a complete success, with minimal American casualties. The intelligence Samuel gathered was so precise that military analysts initially suspected there must have been a human intelligence source inside the Japanese camp. They couldn't believe it came from one man's extraordinary senses. As Samuel's reputation grew, so did the military's interest in understanding the source of his abilities. Blood samples were taken. Psychological evaluations were conducted. Tests involving electromagnetic fields, radiation exposure, and experimental drugs were performed, often without proper consent protocols that would be required today. Dr. Whitman, who had first identified Samuel, began to protest this treatment. In a memo to her superiors dated April 12, 1945, she wrote, "The abilities demonstrated by Subject 2 Rivers appear to be connected to deep cultural and spiritual practices of his people. Our attempts to quantify and replicate these abilities through Western scientific methods are not only failing, but potentially causing harm to the subject. There are some things our current scientific paradigm is simply not equipped to understand." Her concerns were dismissed. The military value of Samuel's abilities was too great to ignore, especially as the war in the Pacific intensified. By May 1945, Samuel 2 Rivers had been credited with over 70 confirmed enemy eliminations, many at distances considered impossible by conventional sniper standards. But more valuable than his marksmanship was his intelligence gathering. Military historians now believe that information provided by Samuel saved thousands of American lives by preventing ambushes and identifying enemy strongpoints. Japanese forces in the Philippines began to circulate stories about an American demon who could see through walls and predict movements before they happened. Some units refused to move at night, believing that darkness gave the mountain spirit greater powers. Captured enemy documents referred to a specific American operative with supernatural abilities, ordering that he be killed on sight, with fire concentrated from multiple positions simultaneously, as conventional methods will fail. But as the war progressed, those closest to Samuel noticed troubling changes. He became increasingly withdrawn. He complained of headaches that would leave him incapacitated for hours. Sometimes he would wake screaming from nightmares, describing events happening thousands of miles away that were later confirmed to have occurred exactly as he described. In a rare recorded interview conducted in 1967, former squad member Private First Class Thomas Jenkins recalled, "2 Rivers started saying he couldn't turn it off anymore. The sensing, the knowing, said it was like having 1,000 radio stations playing in his head all at once. He'd know when one of us got a letter from home before the mail arrived. He predicted enemy attacks hours before they happened, but the toll it took on him. Sometimes he'd just stare into nothing, tears streaming down his face, mumbling about all the death he could feel around him." The most disturbing incident occurred in June 1945. According to multiple witness accounts, Samuel awoke in the middle of the night, gathered his unit leaders, and described in precise detail a massive Japanese counteroffensive being planned for the following week. He sketched maps of enemy positions he couldn't possibly have observed, accurately predicted the exact timing of attacks, and even named several Japanese officers involved in the planning. When military intelligence confirmed his information through other sources days later, Samuel was immediately transferred to a secure facility under the direct oversight of the newly formed Strategic Services Unit, a precursor to the CIA. What happened during the 3 months Samuel spent at this facility remains heavily redacted in all available documents. What we do know is that when he returned to active duty in September 1945, after the war had officially ended, he was a changed man. Captain Dawson's journal entry from September 20th reads simply, "Two Rivers returned today. His eyes are different, like they're looking at something none of the rest of us can see. When I asked where he'd been, he just said, 'The future.' And it's worse than you can imagine." For the next 2 years, Samuel Two Rivers participated in classified operations across the Pacific Rim. The nature of these operations remains unknown, though declassified flight records show transport to locations in China, Korea, and the Soviet Far East. Whatever his missions entailed, they were considered important enough that he was one of only a handful of Indigenous soldiers to receive the Distinguished Service Cross, though the citation is remarkably vague about the specific actions that earned him the medal. The last official record of Samuel Two Rivers in active military service is dated March 17, 1947. A medical discharge form cites psychological fatigue and sensory integration disorders of unknown etiology. He returned to the Yakama Reservation, where, by all accounts, he became increasingly reclusive. Local newspaper records from the Yakima Herald Republic include occasional mentions of Samuel in the years following his return. He refused all interviews and reportedly lived in a remote cabin in the mountains, far from the reservation's main settlement. Tribal members would leave food and supplies at a designated drop point, as Samuel claimed that being around others caused him physical pain due to his inability to block out their thoughts and emotions. In 1954, a team of researchers from a program that records indicate was funded through CIA front organizations, attempted to make contact with Samuel. They were reportedly interested in his potential applications for the escalating Cold War intelligence gathering. According to local accounts, the researchers entered the mountains but never returned to their base camp. A search party found their vehicle and equipment, but no trace of the three-man team. Samuel's cabin was empty when tribal police checked it, with no signs of struggle or foul play. For 3 years, Samuel Two Rivers was officially listed as missing. Then, in October 1957, a park ranger in Olympic National Park found a man matching Samuel's description, wandering in an apparent state of confusion nearly 200 miles from his last known location. When approached, the man fled with such speed and agility through difficult terrain that the ranger lost sight of him within minutes. This began a series of strange sightings across the Pacific Northwest that would span the next 2 decades. Hikers, hunters, and Forest Service workers reported encounters with a Native American man who seemed to appear and disappear at will. Many described feeling as though they had been studied or read by this individual before he vanished into the wilderness. Some claimed he had warned them of imminent dangers, flash floods, landslides, or aggressive wildlife, that later came to pass exactly as described. The most credible of these accounts came from Dr. Robert Stilwell, a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, who was conducting field research near Mount Rainier in 1962. "I was collecting samples when I felt someone watching me," Stilwell wrote in his field journal. "I turned to find a Native American man standing just 30 feet away. I hadn't heard him approach, which was unusual given the rocky terrain. He looked at me with the most penetrating gaze I've ever experienced and said, 'You need to leave this area by nightfall.' When I asked why, he said, 'Because it remembers what happened before, and it's going to happen again.' He turned and walked into the forest. I lost sight of him almost immediately, though the terrain offered no obvious cover within 50 yards. Stilwell reported that he decided to heed the warning and relocated his camp. That night, a sudden landslide destroyed his previous research site. Upon returning to base, Stilwell was debriefed by individuals who identified themselves as Department of Defense researchers. He was asked not to include the encounter in his official reports. By the mid-1960s, the legend of the watchful spirit had become firmly embedded in regional folklore. But to certain branches of the military and intelligence community, Samuel Two Rivers represented something far more significant, proof that human perceptual abilities could be expanded far beyond conventional limits. Declassified documents reveal that between 1966 and 1973, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, allocated over $15 million to a classified program codenamed Sentinel, which aimed to identify and develop individuals with perceptual abilities similar to those demonstrated by Samuel. Test subjects included other indigenous people from tribes across North America, particularly those with cultural traditions involving heightened awareness or far-seeing. None of the test subjects demonstrated abilities approaching Samuel's level. The program was officially terminated in 1973, with its final report concluding that Subject 2 Rivers represents either a statistical anomaly or possesses capabilities derived from sources not replicable through current scientific methods. The last confirmed sighting of Samuel 2 Rivers came in 1976, when a forest fire threatened several communities near the Olympic Peninsula. Fire crews reported encountering an elderly Native American man who guided them to safety through smoke-filled valleys with uncanny precision. When one crew member asked how he could see through the dense smoke, the man reportedly replied, "I don't see with my eyes anymore, that's not how it works." After leading the crews to safety, the man vanished. One of the firefighters later identified him from military photographs as Samuel 2 Rivers. By this point, Samuel would have been 53 years old, though the firefighter described him as appearing much older, like the weight of 100 years was on him. No official death certificate was ever issued for Samuel 2 Rivers. To this day, his status in military records remains inactive, special classification, a designation rarely used and typically reserved for operatives whose work remains classified decades after their service. The most disturbing aspects of Samuel's story emerged in 2001, when the Freedom of Information Act finally forced the declassification of certain documents related to Project Sentinel. These papers revealed that Samuel's extraordinary abilities had continued to develop throughout his military service, eventually extending beyond mere sensory perception. Dr. Whitman's personal journals, released after her death in 1995, contained entries suggesting that Samuel had begun to display precognitive abilities, the capacity to perceive events before they occurred. Initially, these manifested as tactical insights, knowing which ridge an enemy patrol would cross or which building they would use as a sniper nest before they themselves had decided. "I no longer believe we are dealing with enhanced perception in the conventional sense," Whitman wrote in August 1945. "Subject 2 Rivers appears to exist partially outside our normal temporal framework. When pressed about how he knows what enemy forces will do, he becomes frustrated and insists he is simply reporting what he observes. I see it already happening," he told me yesterday. "Not what might happen or could happen. What is happening, just not yet for you." The military's response to these developments was to deepen their experimentation. Records indicate that Samuel was subjected to increasing doses of experimental compounds derived from indigenous plant medicines, combined with early electronic brain stimulation techniques. The goal, according to internal memos, was to stabilize and enhance precognitive abilities while maintaining subject functionality. Former Army psychiatrist Dr. Victor Stein, who worked on classified military research programs in the 1960s, provided limited testimony about Samuel's case before his death in 2017. While bound by secrecy oaths, Dr. Stein confirmed that Samuel 2 Rivers was considered the most successful subject in a decades-long effort to develop enhanced human intelligence assets. The abilities he demonstrated violated everything we understood about human perception, Dr. Stein said in a recorded interview with a medical historian, but the toll it took. "That man experienced more psychological trauma than anyone I've ever encountered. Imagine perceiving death and suffering, not just in the present moment, but across time simultaneously. Past, present, future, all equally real and immediate. We pushed him far beyond what any human mind was designed to endure. Perhaps the most chilling evidence comes from a partially redacted transcript of a debriefing session conducted in August 1945, shortly after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Interviewer: "Can you describe what you're sensing right now? 2 Rivers, inaudible everywhere, not just now, it's spreading." Interviewer: "What's spreading, Samuel?" 2 Rivers: "The burning, the sickness in the blood. I can feel them dying now and 20 years from now all at once. Children who aren't even born yet, screaming as their cells tear apart. It doesn't stop. It's still happening. It will always be happening. Interviewer: You're referring to the special weapons deployed in Japan. 2 rivers. You don't understand. You've torn something. In the world, in time. I can feel it spreading like cracks in ice. The weapons you've made, the ones you haven't built yet. I can feel all the deaths they cause, are causing, will cause. Millions of voices crying out across decades. Interviewer: That's very interesting, Samuel. Can you identify specific future deployment locations or scenarios for these weapons? At this point, the transcript indicates Samuel became non-responsive for several hours. When he resumed speaking, his comments were deemed sensitive enough to merit complete redaction from all declassified versions of the document. What we do know is that 3 days after this interview, Samuel Two Rivers was transferred to a specialized facility beneath Mount Weather in Virginia, a site later confirmed to be associated with the government's most classified research programs. He remained there for 13 months before being returned to more conventional military service. According to fragmentary records and testimony from former military personnel, Samuel's abilities during this period had evolved to the point where normal human interaction became nearly impossible. He would respond to questions that hadn't been asked yet, react to events before they occurred, and speak in what one doctor described as chronological salad, mixing past, present, and future tenses in ways that made conventional communication extremely difficult. Major Thomas Blackwood, who oversaw security at the Mount Weather facility, later testified to a closed congressional committee that researchers became convinced Samuel was no longer experiencing time in a linear fashion. He described future events with the same clarity as past ones, Blackwood stated. He could tell you what you had for breakfast 3 days ago with the same certainty as what you would have for breakfast 3 days from now. And he was right. Always right. It terrified the research team. Several of them requested transfers after he started describing in precise detail the circumstances of their deaths, some decades in the future. By 1947, military leadership had grown increasingly concerned about the ethical implications and potential security risks of continuing to work with Samuel. His psychological state had deteriorated significantly, with reports describing episodes of catatonia, alternating with periods of extreme agitation during which he would shout warnings about future conflicts and technological disasters. Dr. Whitman, who had maintained a close professional relationship with Samuel throughout this period, advocated strongly for his release from the program. In a memo to her superiors dated January 1947, she wrote, "Subject Two Rivers' continued participation in this program constitutes not only a grave ethical violation, but an increasing security risk. His mental state has destabilized to the point where he can no longer distinguish between classified information he has been briefed on and information he has perceived through his apparent precognitive abilities. More disturbing is his claim that certain future events are now fixed and unavoidable due to decisions being made in the present." He specifically referenced conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and several other regions that do not align with current strategic assessments. I recommend his immediate release and return to his tribal homeland, where traditional healing practices may succeed where our methods have failed. The recommendation was initially rejected, but as Samuel's condition continued to deteriorate, military leadership finally conceded. The official record states that Samuel Two Rivers was medically discharged and returned to the Yakama Reservation in March 1947. What the official record doesn't mention is that 3 separate military intelligence units were tasked with maintaining surveillance on Samuel after his return. Their reports, partially declassified in 2019, paint a disturbing picture of a man struggling to exist in conventional reality. Subject maintains minimal human contact, reads one report from June 1947. Resident on neighboring property reports, subject frequently holding conversations with individuals who are not present. Subject sometimes addresses these invisible presences by name, including individuals confirmed deceased and others whose names do not match any known associates. Another report from September that same year notes, Subject has constructed a series of complex symbolic arrangements around his property using stones, wood, and native plants. When tribal members inquired about their purpose, Subject stated they were anchors to help him stay in this time. The local tribal elders have expressed concern about these structures, stating they do not align with traditional practices. Perhaps the most unsettling development came in December 1947, when Samuel began to create detailed drawings and maps of places he claimed to have visited through his expanded perception. These included accurate representations of military installations in the Soviet Union that were only confirmed to exist by U-2 spy plane reconnaissance years later. He also produced drawings of weapon systems, computer technologies, and satellite designs that would not be developed for decades. This triggered immediate concern at the highest levels of military intelligence. A team was dispatched to take Samuel back into custody. But when they arrived at his cabin in January 1948, he was gone. The only item left behind was a hand-drawn map of the United States with dozens of locations marked with dates spanning from 1948 to 2030. A note scrawled across the bottom read, "These cannot be unmade. I will do what I can." For the next 7 years, Samuel Two Rivers effectively vanished. Despite one of the most extensive manhunts in intelligence community history, no confirmed sightings were reported. Then, in April 1955, a forest ranger in Yellowstone National Park encountered a man matching Samuel's description at the site of a small plane crash. According to the ranger's report, the man had arrived before emergency services, despite the crash location being more than 30 miles from the nearest road. When I asked how he knew about the crash, he looked at me strangely and said, "It's been happening for 3 days now. I couldn't stop it, but I could be here when it did." He helped me treat the survivors until medical evacuation arrived, then walked into the forest. When I radioed for another ranger to intercept him on the main trail, they reported no sign of him, though there was no other way out of the valley. Throughout the late 1950s and 60s, similar reports accumulated across the American wilderness. A mysterious Native American man would appear at the scenes of accidents or natural disasters, often before they occurred, provide assistance, and then vanish. In some cases, his warnings prevented tragedies entirely. A family in Oregon reported being approached by a weathered Indian man while camping who insisted they relocate their tent. That night, a massive branch fell exactly where they had originally set up camp. The intelligence community continued to track these incidents, increasingly convinced that Samuel was using his abilities to prevent deaths when possible. But their investigations also revealed a pattern that deeply concerned them. Samuel appeared to be systematically visiting sites on the map he had left behind in 1948. Each location corresponds to either a nuclear research facility, missile silo, command center, or strategic materials storage, noted one classified analysis from 1962. Subject 2. Rivers appears to be conducting reconnaissance on our entire nuclear weapons infrastructure. Recommend immediate apprehension and containment. Teams were dispatched to the remaining locations on the map, hoping to intercept Samuel. In September 1963, they succeeded. Her 3-man team encountered Samuel at a remote location in the Nevada desert, not far from a classified facility. According to their heavily redacted report, Samuel offered no resistance. "Subject appeared to have been waiting for us," the team leader wrote. "First words upon approach, you're 3 days late. I was beginning to worry." Samuel was transported to a specialized facility beneath the newly constructed Mount Rushmore National Memorial. For the next 4 years, he was subjected to extensive debriefing and testing. The full records remain classified, but fragmentary information suggests that military intelligence was particularly interested in Samuel's predictions regarding the Cold War, nuclear strategy, and future conflicts. Samuel provided thousands of pages of information, much of which was deemed too sensitive to maintain in written records. According to Dr. David Chen, a physicist who later admitted to being part of the debriefing team, Samuel's knowledge of advanced weapon systems and their potential consequences was terrifyingly comprehensive. He could describe the exact blast radius, radiation patterns, and long-term environmental impacts of weapons that were still on drawing boards. Dr. Chen told a journalist in 2011, breaking decades of silence. But what disturbed us most was his emotional detachment. He described potential nuclear exchanges not as hypotheticals but as events he had witnessed. 63 million dead in the first hour, he would say, in the same tone someone might use to describe yesterday's weather. By 1967, a core group of military and scientific personnel working with Samuel had become convinced that his abilities were genuine. More troublingly, they began to share his concern that certain future catastrophes might be inevitable without drastic intervention. This group, operating without official sanction, helped orchestrate Samuel's escape from the facility in November 1967. The official record states only that Subject 2 Rivers escaped custody through means unknown. Unofficial accounts suggest that several high-ranking officials deliberately created security vulnerabilities after Samuel shared with them visions of an imminent nuclear exchange that could only be prevented through back-channel diplomatic efforts. For the next 9 years, Samuel 2 Rivers once again disappeared from official records. Rumors persisted that he was living deep in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, but organized search efforts failed to locate him. During this period, however, a series of unexplained phenomena occurred near military installations across the country. Security personnel reported equipment malfunctions, unexplained communications, and even physical rearrangement of certain materials, particularly those associated with nuclear launch systems. In 1976, at the height of renewed Cold War tensions, Samuel 2 Rivers resurfaced in the most unexpected way. He walked into the lobby of the Washington Post and asked to speak with renowned investigative journalist Carl Bernstein. Their conversation lasted 5 hours. No recording exists, and Bernstein has never published details of the meeting. But colleagues reported that he emerged from the interview visibly shaken. 3 days later, Bernstein arranged a private meeting between Samuel and a senior State Department official. Within weeks, a new back-channel communication line was established between US and Soviet leaders, leading to a thaw in relations that historians now credit with preventing a dangerous escalation of nuclear tensions. Samuel vanished immediately after these meetings. The last confirmed documentation of his existence is a handwritten note delivered to Dr. Whitman, who had retired to a small town in Vermont. The note, which Whitman's family donated to a university archive after her death, reads simply, "The futures are branching again. I can see paths now that don't end in fire. Your grandchildren might live full lives in a world where the great weapons remain silent. I've done what I could with this burden. Others will carry it after me. Look to the children who see differently. They're being born more frequently now. They'll need guides who understand without fear. Remember that time is not what you think it is. Neither is death." The note was signed Samuel and dated October 12, 1976. No verified sighting of Samuel 2 Rivers has been reported since. In the decades that followed, the military's interest in psychic phenomena and extrasensory perception became public knowledge through programs like Project Stargate, which investigated remote viewing and other parapsychological phenomena. What remained classified, however, was how much of this research had been inspired by the capabilities demonstrated by Samuel 2 Rivers decades earlier. Former intelligence officers who worked on these later programs have occasionally made cryptic references to a baseline subject whose abilities far exceeded anything reproduced in controlled studies. In 1995, a retired Army general testified before a closed Senate committee that the most promising subject in the history of psychic research programs was an Indigenous soldier whose abilities manifested spontaneously during combat operations in World War II. The transcript of this testimony remains largely classified. In 2001, following a series of Freedom of Information lawsuits, the government released over 3,000 pages of documents related to psychological research programs involving Indigenous soldiers. While heavily redacted, these documents confirmed that Samuel 2 Rivers had been the template for decades of research into enhanced human perception. Dr. Robert Morningsky, a Native American scholar who has studied these documents extensively, believes that Samuel's abilities were not as inexplicable as government researchers believed. Many indigenous cultures have traditions involving individuals who can perceive beyond ordinary reality, Dr. Morning Sky explained in a 2005 interview. These traditions describe techniques for expanding consciousness that have been practiced for thousands of years. What made Samuel Two Rivers unique was not that he possessed these abilities, but that he was forced to use them within a Western military context that had no framework for understanding them. The trauma this caused likely amplified his abilities in unpredictable ways. The Yakama Nation has maintained a complex relationship with Samuel's legacy. While proud of his service and extraordinary gifts, tribal elders have expressed concern about how those gifts were exploited. In 2010, the Tribal Council passed a resolution calling for the full declassification of all records related to Samuel Two Rivers and other indigenous soldiers who participated in classified military research programs. Our people have always known that perception extends beyond the physical senses, the resolution stated. What happened to Samuel Two Rivers represents both the power of our traditional knowledge and the dangers of separating that knowledge from its cultural context. His story must be told in full. The military and intelligence communities have resisted these calls for transparency. As recently as 2023, official statements have maintained that certain aspects of Samuel's service and abilities remain too sensitive for public disclosure. What makes this ongoing secrecy particularly troubling are the rumors that have persisted for decades among indigenous communities across North America. These stories suggest that Samuel Two Rivers was not unique, that others with similar abilities have appeared in the decades since, particularly among children born on reservations near sites of environmental contamination or military testing. James Clearwater, a Lakota elder who claims to have met Samuel in the early 1970s, shared a disturbing account in a 2015 oral history project. He told me they had changed something fundamental in him, something that couldn't be undone. He said it was spreading, that more children would be born seeing across time, as he put it. He believed it was the Earth's response to the wounds we've inflicted on her, creating guardians who could see disasters before they happened and work to prevent them. But he warned that if these children were found by the same people who had used him, they would suffer as he had. Declassified military documents from the 1980s confirm that intelligence agencies maintained active programs to identify children with unusual perceptual abilities, with particular focus on indigenous communities. These programs were officially terminated in 1995, but many researchers believe they continued under deeper classification. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Samuel Two Rivers' story is how closely it parallels indigenous prophecies about a time when the barriers between past, present, and future would become permeable. Many tribal traditions speak of individuals who would serve as time walkers or seers of what will be during periods of great crisis. In 2017, an anonymous source claiming to be a former DARPA researcher uploaded hundreds of pages of classified documents to various online platforms before they were quickly removed. Among these documents was a study correlating global environmental degradation with an increase in children demonstrating unexplained perceptual abilities. The study specifically noted that these manifestations closely resembled those first documented in Samuel Two Rivers over 70 years earlier. While the authenticity of these documents has never been verified, they raised disturbing questions about whether Samuel's condition was truly unique, or whether it represented an emerging human adaptation to unprecedented planetary stresses. The most recent development in this ongoing mystery came in 2021, when hikers in Olympic National Park discovered an ancient-looking arrangement of stones and carved wooden markers deep in a valley rarely visited by humans. At the center of this arrangement was a weathered metal container holding a handwritten journal. Carbon dating of the paper and ink suggested it had been placed there in the late 1970s. The journal, now held by the Smithsonian under restricted access, reportedly contains detailed descriptions of global events from 1977 to the present day, written as if they had already occurred. Even more disturbing are the entries describing events from our near future, environmental tipping points, technological breakthroughs, conflicts, and reconciliations that have yet to unfold. The final page allegedly contains a message addressed to whoever found the journal. Time is not a river flowing in one direction. It is an ocean, and some of us have learned to swim. What I have written here are not predictions, but observations from different depths of that ocean. Some can be changed. Others are like currents too powerful to resist. Learn to recognize the difference. The children who can see as I do are among you now. They walk your streets, they sit in your classrooms. Some already know what they are. Others are just awakening. They are not weapons to be wielded. They are not tools to be used. They are the Earth's eyes looking backward and forward to find a path through the destruction we have set in motion. The journal was signed simply Samuel. Military intelligence officials confiscated the journal within hours of its discovery. When questioned about this action, a Department of Defense spokesperson stated only that the material was potentially relevant to ongoing national security matters, and that it remained under evaluation. To this day, the full truth about Samuel Two Rivers remains hidden behind layers of classification and institutional secrecy. But perhaps the most compelling evidence that his story continues comes from the Yakima Reservation itself, where tribal members report that each year, on the winter solstice, traditional offerings appear at Samuel's abandoned cabin. No one sees who leaves them, but elders insist they are meant to honor not just Samuel's memory, but his continued journey through realms of perception most humans cannot access. Some say that if you walk deep enough into the forests of the Pacific Northwest, far from roads and settlements, you might encounter an ageless indigenous man with eyes that seem to look through you and beyond you. He won't speak at first, he'll simply study you, as if reading not just who you are, but all the versions of yourself that exist across time. If you're deemed worthy, he might share a message, a warning about a personal danger you will soon face, or wisdom about a choice that will alter the course of your life. Then he'll vanish, seemingly melting into the forest itself, continuing his endless vigil across the landscapes of time. Is Samuel Two Rivers still alive, decades after he should have died of old age? Has he truly transcended the normal limitations of human perception and longevity? Or has his story become something more, a modern myth that speaks to our deepest hopes and fears about human potential and the mysteries that science cannot yet explain? What seems certain is that somewhere in the classified archives of military intelligence agencies lies the truth about the most extraordinary psychic soldier in American history, a man whose abilities may have saved millions of lives, altered the course of the Cold War, and whose genetic or spiritual legacy may still be unfolding in children born today. As we face unprecedented global challenges, climate change, technological risks, and geopolitical tensions, one has to wonder, are there others like Samuel walking among us? Individuals who see beyond the present moment and work in the shadows to guide humanity away from its most destructive possibilities. Perhaps the most profound question raised by Samuel Two Rivers' story is not whether his abilities were real, but what they suggest about human potential and our relationship to time itself. If one man could develop such extraordinary perception, what might be possible for humanity as a whole? In Samuel's own reported words, "Time is not a cage unless you believe in the bars. The future is not fixed. It breathes and shifts with every choice we make. The greatest gift is not seeing what will be, but showing others that they have the power to change it." Regardless of whether you believe in Samuel's extraordinary abilities or dismiss them as exaggerations and myth, his message about human agency and responsibility resonates in our uncertain times. The power to shape the future remains in our hands, if we have the wisdom to use it well. As you reflect on this remarkable story, remember that there are forces in this world beyond our current understanding. In times of darkness and uncertainty, perhaps we should follow the example of the Yakima elders who still leave offerings at Samuel's cabin, honoring the mysteries we cannot explain and remaining open to wisdom from unexpected sources. In closing, we must acknowledge that while Samuel Two Rivers used his extraordinary gifts in service to his country, the most profound aspect of his legacy may be his ultimate rejection of violence. A man who could sense enemies miles away eventually recognized that the true enemies were not foreign soldiers, but forces far more subtle and dangerous: greed, fear, disconnection from nature, and the belief that some lives matter less than others. As we navigate our own challenging times, perhaps we would do well to develop our own capacity for heightened perception, not through classified military programs, but through reconnection with ancient wisdom that reminds us of our interdependence with all life. Follow Christ, and let his light guide you through these uncertain times. For as Samuel Two Rivers reportedly told a young tribal member in one of his last known appearances, when you stand at the crossroads of time, seeing all paths at once, you learn that only love endures. Everything else, power, weapons, empires, all wash away like footprints in sand. Choose the path of compassion, even when it seems weak. In the longest view, it is the only strength that matters.